a dramatic day in court today after a judge takes action on an issue that has loomed over the entire country since the ex-president first descended those escalators at Trump Tower 8 long years ago. And that is, of course, his long-standing practice of threatening and wielding violent and dangerous rhetoric as a weapon against anyone who he perceives as standing in his way of anything, inevitably facing the potential for violence. Donald Trump now under a gag order limiting what he can say about court staff in his New York civil fraud trial was back in court this morning before he eventually left during a break. NBC News reports this. Speaking outside the courtroom before the trial started, Trump again decried it as a political hit job against him as he repeated his ongoing attacks against New York Attorney General Letitia James, whom he accused of trying to interfere with his chances of another presidential term. In fact, Trump returned to the cameras multiple times, railing against Tish James and the prosecutors who have brought criminal charges against him. There are 91 felony counts in total against him. He also attacked Judge Engoron. Trump's rants against the legal system have not stopped or slowed online either. Once again from NBC News, hours after the trial wrapped up yesterday, Trump aired his grievances in a post on his Truth Social platform, saying the trial is unfair and again suggesting it was an attempt to interfere with his presidential campaign. Attorney General James addressed Trump's attacks on her in a brief statement a few hours ago.
Mr. Trump's comments were offensive, they were baseless, they were void of any facts and/or any evidence. What they were comments that unfortunately fomented violence, and comments that I would describe as race baiting, and comments, unfortunately, that appeals to the bottom of our humanity. This case was brought simply because it was a case where individuals have engaged in a pattern and practice of fraud. And I will not sit idly by and allow anyone to subvert the law. And lastly, I will not be bullied. And so Mr. Trump is no longer here. The Donald Trump show is over. This was nothing more than a political stunt, a fundraising stop. And now we can continue to go forward with our trial, and we are confident that justice will be served.
Wow. It's worth remembering that these remarks and posts from Trump that she's referring to come from an individual, I would say for better or worse, but it's mostly just for worse, with one of the most powerful megaphones the world over. As the New York Times reports about Judge Engoron's decision to impose this gag order, quote, the judge spoke gravely Tuesday as he explained the terms of his order. He noted that while Trump had taken down the Truth Social post about Ms. Greenfield, the former president's campaign had already sent out a copy in an email to millions of people. The power of Trump's rhetoric remains a factor over the proceedings, where two former Trump accountants testified, including Donald Bender. He had previously testified that he compiled financial statements for the Trump org using information given to him by Trump and his company. Donald Trump's civil fraud trial, grappling with the consequences of Trump's ongoing dangerous rhetoric, is where we begin today. With me here at the table, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times investigations reporter Russ Buettner is back with us. Also joining us, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann, a former top official with the Justice Department, and former FBI counterintelligence agent Pete Strzok is back as well. Andrew Weissmann, I want to start with you. And I know that in the political arena, Trump's lies have a cumulative positive effect for him. They aid him politically because he lies so many times that his supporters believe that there was some fraud in the 2020 election, or whatever the lie is he's telling them. But I wonder, in a legal capacity, if he is clearly making these stops to raise money, if they're going to bite him in the butt when he tries to argue that he doesn't have time to go to trials because he's campaigning. He is making the trials the centerpiece of his political candidacy.
Well, I don't think that he's going to do very well with the current motions that he's made in D.C. and in Florida, where he is seeking more time in what the government has said is a transparent effort to ultimately have the trial dates put off, a March date in the D.C. federal case and a May date in the Florida federal case. I don't think it is going to play well when people see that he has ample time to engage in other activities other than preparing for trial. Judge Chutkan in the DC case has already made it quite clear that whatever his extracurricular activities are, meaning whether he wants to run for office or not, there is a criminal case, and that is going to go forward the way it would for anyone else. Her analogy was to a sports hero who says, but I've got games to play. She said that's, all good and well, but we're going forward with a criminal trial which takes precedence over anything that you choose to do or choose not to do. So I don't think it's going to really play that well. I on that score, I think the much more salient and important issue is the continued rhetoric and whether this first gag order is sufficient as a sort of brushback and causes the former president to measure his sort of call and response with respect to violence. We will know more about that on October 16th when there's a hearing on that issue in federal court in D.C. But I think that's the key, for me at least, that's the key date in terms of understanding whether judges will impose further restrictions other than the sort of very narrow restriction that was imposed yesterday in this civil case.
Let me dive deeper into that with you, Andrew Weissmann. I mean, this argument that the judge is making that even though you took down the incendiary post, you'd also smeared, maligned, defamed, whatever the word was, our staff in an email sent to your millions and millions and millions of supporters. The permanence of the attacks are something that Jack Smith gets at in his filing related to that October 16th hearing on his request for a gag order. And Jack Smith writes this, quote, "The defendant should not be permitted to obtain the benefits of his incendiary public statements and then avoid accountability by having others, whose messages he knows will receive markedly less attention than his own, feign retraction. Likewise, no other criminal defendant would be permitted to issue public statements insinuating that a known witness in his case should be executed. This defendant should not be either." I mean, this again, I think what I'm trying to wrap my brain around are his patterns and practices of lying, smearing, intimidating, threatening, bullying that have all of their parallels in efforts to prosecute Mexican drug cartels, efforts to prosecute mob figures here in this country. Is he really running into a friction point with these judges and with these courts in terms of his escalating rhetoric and their filings?
I don't know the answer to that. That's why I do think October 16th is going to be key. I think one way I look at that question, Nicole, is we saw yesterday the judge's reaction when the attack was on the judge's own staff. And I totally understand why the judge did what he did, and I commend him for that. And the only thing that I would say, though, is the litany of sort of rhetoric that you've outlined is it shouldn't take that you have a personal relationship and it's someone's staff that is being attacked. That is true for the jurors, the witnesses, the prosecutors, the judge, and all of their family members and staff. It shouldn't have to be that it's something so over the top and it deals with somebody who's so defenseless that you have a judge taking action. And obviously you want to take action before it's too late. That goes to your point that once it's out there, it is very, very hard to take back. The call and response is already in effect. And let's just remember, there are people who have been charged in connection with taking action in response to this rhetoric. So whether the former president is intending it or not, and I think there's a very good argument that it is intended, it is something that will be responded to, even if you then take it back later, or forced in this case to take it back. So it'll be very interesting to see whether the DC judge thinks that this is crossed a line where further action needs to be taken.